Let's talk about day 4 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial. We finished hearing from Dr. David Kipper, then we got to hear from Debbie Lloyd, who was Johnny Depp's assigned registered nurse, and we started to hear from Johnny's chief security guard, Sean Bett. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legalbytes. If you are new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. So, in our live coverage of day 4 of this trial on this channel, we heard the rest of the video deposition testimony of Dr. David Kipper. And as I've said before, video deposition testimony is a little tough on the attention, let's just say. Truth be told, I'm not so certain just how much of these witness testimonies by video deposition the jury is actually going to remember. By this point in the trial, it sort of starts to feel like a Van Gogh painting, where you sort of lose a lot of the finer details of the witnesses and start to just develop an overall impression when you step back from it. Nonetheless, we did learn some more details. For starters, we found out that Johnny has ADHD, bipolar disorder, and insomnia, among other maladies to include depression, anxiety, and, of course, drug addiction. We learned that in August 2014, Dr. Kipper was on Johnny's island in the Bahamas with Johnny to help him with his drug detox program. We also learned through Dr. David Kipper that registered nurse Debbie Lloyd, the nurse assigned specifically to Johnny, was also on the island as well for the same purpose. Dr. Kipper says that while on the island, he would make contact with Johnny several times a day. Once would be in person, and the others would be by phone. To me, that sounds like not a bad gig if you can get it. Anyway, he also testified that while on the island at this time, he observed Amber as well and saw no injuries. He also said that he witnessed no evidence that Johnny ever abused Amber, nor did he ever witness any evidence of Amber abusing Johnny. And then Dr. Kipper said that Amber also became a patient of his sometime between August and October 2014 when Dr. Kipper assigned registered nurse Erin Borum to her. He confirmed that Nurse Borum had an obligation to report any suspected abuse of Amber, that Nurse Borum would have reported anything she saw to that effect, and that she never reported any evidence of any physical injuries. Now, next, he talked about the Australia incident in March 2015. As before, he said that he arrived at the house with Nurse Lloyd after he received a text message from Johnny saying that he had cut his finger. And when he arrived, Johnny was outside of the house and sitting in the car. So Dr. Kipper says that he examined the finger, cleaned the wound, and then went to the ER. Dr. Kipper also said that at some point he looked into the house to see the damage and to help find the tip of Johnny's finger, which had been, shall we say, liberated from the rest of his body. It took some investigation, but Dr. Kipper said that it was found somewhere in the kitchen, perhaps by Johnny's chef among broken glass. And when he saw Amber in the house, he noticed that she was upset. However, he also said that she reported no injuries to him and that he also saw no physical injuries on her. No bruises, no broken nose, no swelling face, and no cuts on her arms. And as for Johnny, Dr. Kipper said that he also observed no other cuts on him other than his severed finger. And when asked if he knew how it happened, he said that he had heard Johnny had told the ER doctors that he had cut himself with a knife. Then, towards the end of his testimony, he said that he never saw either be violent towards each other, and neither one ever complained to him about the other being violent against them. He never saw any photos from Amber's nurse, Erin Borum, showing any kind of bruising on her face. And he said that if Nurse Borum had been given those kinds of photos and thought that they were valid, she would have reported them to Dr. Kipper. Now, there's just a couple more interesting notes from Dr. Kipper's testimony. First, he describes how Amber got a physical exam on December 17th, 2015. Now, this is significant because Amber alleges that on December 15th, 2015, Johnny violently assaulted her, giving her 2 black eyes, breaking her nose, pulling hair from her scalp, and giving her bruising around her head. On December 17th, 2015, according to the medical report detailing the visit, she apparently reported to the doctor that she had a headache from hitting her head 2 days prior. The report showed that she expressed no loss of consciousness, no nausea, no vomiting, and no change in mental status or vision changes. A concussion check was performed and found that she had no concussion. Also, Dr. Kipper said that the report would have noted any physical injuries and that it did not mention any. But the final thing that was interesting in his testimony was that on August 8th, 2016, Amber sent Dr. Kipper an email. In that email, she requested all of her medical records, but only from 1 month, specifically December 2015. What's interesting about that is, of course, December 15th, 2015, like I said, is the date of one of the incidents in which Amber alleges that Johnny violently assaulted her. And August 2016 is when she already was in the time period of her divorce from Johnny. It's not quite clear exactly what this all says about Amber, but it is strange that she would request just 1 month as opposed to her entire medical file. Looking back, honestly, so much of Dr. Kipper's testimony looks like Johnny did a lot of drugs. He tried to get off them in the Bahamas and failed. And there was an incident where his finger was separated from the rest of his body in Australia. Aside from that, it's really unclear how much the jury is going to pick up from a witness like Dr. Kipper, especially through testimony by video deposition. But did you watch Dr. Kipper's testimony? If so, let us know what you think in the comments down below. Anyway, then we met Debbie Lloyd. We learned that she was Johnny's assigned registered nurse who contracted to perform work for Dr. Kipper. She's a certified drug addiction nurse who specializes in psychiatric mental health. After getting through some of her background and when she started providing care to Johnny, then we got to the main substance of her testimony. And let me tell you, this was particularly rough as a viewer. It wasn't because she answered poorly or because she came off in some bad light. It was because, as the viewer, it kind of felt like we were dying a death of 1,000 I don't recalls. Now, a note about answering I don't recall while testifying. Of course, if a witness does not remember exactly what it is they're being asked about, it is an honest response to say I don't recall, and a witness is always supposed to respond honestly. There are, however, times that that kind of response can come across as a little bit sus, however. For example, if a witness recalls perfectly things that are great for one side, then mysteriously seems to have selective amnesia about good facts for the other side, that starts to look a little bit fishy. And then if you get a witness who says nothing other than I don't recall, then it brings up the question, why are you here testifying in the first place? How is anything that you're saying going to be helpful to the jury? Now, in this case, Nurse Lloyd responded with a lot of I don't recalls. However, the fact that she was giving that response while testifying in a professional capacity makes it a little bit different. For one thing, she was testifying off the medical records that she took while providing care to Johnny, and those are really the most valuable part of her testimony anyway. She was primarily there to look at her old medical notes throughout that time, say that they were her notes, and say that they were basically a true and accurate representation of what happened on those days that she saw Johnny. So it's understandable that a medical professional would not recall details from providing care to a single patient when they may have given care to who knows how many patients since then. Second, we were also fortunate during this live stream to have Nurse Liz from the YouTube channel of the same name on the live stream during a portion of Nurse Lloyd's testimony. Nurse Liz had some really interesting insight about Nurse Lloyd's I don't recall responses. Most interestingly, she said that when nurses are testifying about their medical notes or off of their medical notes, they are generally trained before going into a deposition to respond with precisely that. I don't recall. The reason for that is because there is a massive chance that their memories are not perfect. And if you don't remember something perfectly, there's always a chance that as a nurse, you can say something that can get twisted into a different meaning. And as a result, you can get surprised with some kind of medical malpractice litigation. So, generally speaking, responding with things like, according to my notes, what you're saying is correct, and not adding anything further is totally normal. And the same would be true for responses like, I don't recall. And further, Nurse Liz also elaborated that if a nurse is going to add any more detail, it's generally going to be detail coming out of something other than what his or her medical care of the patient was. So that was so enlightening, and I'm so glad that we were able to share that over the live stream. But of course, the jury doesn't necessarily have that kind of information, so it is unclear what they will make of these I don't recall responses. Now, aside from that, we did get some interesting information from Nurse Lloyd. First, we got more text written by Johnny on August 24th, 2016, in his typical poetic, metaphorical style. When he was asked if he was okay and if his quote unquote head was back on straight, he responded something to the effect of, pretty much, and then had a long, winding response about cutting off his arm if it ever got gangrenous. This seems to indicate Johnny's dark sense of humor, but of course, the Heard legal team could try to use this as Johnny being a wild drug addict with tendencies towards self-harm of his own limbs. to include his finger. Now, something that she noted that was maybe not so great for Johnny was that she learned that there was an incident where Johnny and Amber were fighting and how Johnny punched a whiteboard shortly after the fight. She arrived later to find that he had bloody knuckles and a scraped hand. Now, although this is not violence against Amber, some could take this as showing a tendency or a habit of violence during these arguments with Amber. Others might see that as Johnny understanding that violence against a person is wrong and that when he feels enough frustration to bring him to a certain level of agitation, it's much safer to bring violence against an item which doesn't harm a person. However, as a litigator, I personally don't like seeing that kind of ambiguity that is left up to interpretation. It could be taken one way or the other, honestly. Now, another point that the Heard legal team is likely to try to use is a text from Johnny to Nurse Lloyd on November 11th, 2014, about how Amber was out late at a wrap party and how he, quote unquote, didn't know what's real or what's just jealousy or anxiety. Amber is likely to use this to say that either Johnny doesn't understand reality or that Johnny was controlling, manipulative, and jealous, or maybe all of the above. On the other hand, Johnny is likely to use this to show that Amber was essentially tormenting him by flying about, possibly cheating on him with other men at various parties at all hours of the day and night. Now, as for the Australia incident in March 2015, Nurse Lloyd testified that she basically saw the same thing as Dr. Kipper, except for a few minor differences. First, she says that it was Ben, the house manager, who found the tip of Johnny's finger. That detail is probably neither here nor there, but the difference is noted. Second, she reported that there were multiple accounts as to how that happened. On the one hand, she heard that it happened when Amber threw a glass bottle at Johnny, and on the other hand, she heard that it happened somehow when Johnny slammed his phone on some kind of a surface. Now, this is different because Dr. Kipper testified that Johnny told the ER doctor that he cut it himself with a knife. I'm not sure exactly how that discrepancy plays out for the jury, but it was interesting to note the difference. And the final difference is that as for Amber, Nurse Lloyd said that she saw a bruise on Amber's arm, but no other injuries. Dr. Kipper, on the other hand, testified that he didn't see any injuries on Amber. Anyway, then Nurse Lloyd had a lot of testimony about treating Johnny's finger over the months that followed the incident. One thing that Nurse Lloyd testified was that throughout this treatment, she doesn't recall the finger being a crush injury, which would mean less support for Amber's theory that he severed it by slamming his phone too hard. But one thing that she said about the finger injury that doesn't necessarily help Johnny is that she testified that if she suspects that an injury is caused by another person, she is required to report it. And she didn't report the finger injury to anyone. She also read from her notes that Johnny said that while detoxing in the Bahamas, he felt that Amber was interfering with his ability to detox by reporting things to medical personnel that weren't true. What those things were, though, remains unclear because she said that she couldn't remember the specifics. Now, one thing that is helpful to Johnny's case is that Nurse Lloyd said that she herself witnessed multiple times that Amber was instigating Johnny, where Johnny would just try to leave and Amber would follow him, sometimes following him from room to room in any facility. One example of Amber instigating Johnny was when they were on a plane to Japan. Nurse Lloyd described Johnny as sitting at a table, not wanting to talk, and Amber refusing to leave the table. There was also a point that she mentioned about a prenup. Nurse Lloyd noted that Johnny mentioned he had passed the idea to Amber about signing a prenup and that Amber was not happy about it. Nurse Lloyd also testified to receiving text messages from Johnny claiming that Amber's sister stole some Adderall from him, which was prescribed for his ADHD. And finally, like Dr. Kipper, Nurse Lloyd testified that she didn't recall seeing either one of them commit any acts of violence against one another. Okay, so that was it for the video deposition for today. Next, we heard from Sean Bett, who testified in person. Sean Bett is Johnny's chief security guard who has worked for Johnny for over 20 years and still does to this day. Now, during his direct examination by the Depp legal team, this guy definitely came across as a cop. And we learned right away that he previously was an LAPD officer who served on the gang unit, the homicide unit, and more. He definitely seemed like he had experience testifying as a witness in court, since he would turn to the jury to speak directly to them and came across just as measured overall in his responses. However, he also very quickly came across as biased, not just because he still works for Johnny, but also because he seemed to be trying to get information into the record that he knew was going to be objectionable. As an example, when he was asked if Johnny had any injuries from a particular incident, instead of saying he had scratches on his face, he said, Amber scratched Johnny's face during an incident where Mr. Bett wasn't around. That means, of course, that although he was there to see the injuries on Johnny Depp's face, he wasn't around to know whether those were caused by Amber or by someone or something else. Now, although once or twice a witness can be excused doing this, he started to do this a lot, much to the chagrin of Judge Azcarate, who reminded him at one point that he probably is an experienced witness. And this was a very light reprimand, but a serious reminder from Judge A that he needs to do better, especially since he probably knows what he's doing. And it's notable that this was in front of a jury who may be thinking that they can discount his testimony on account of his bias coming through in his testimony already. Anyway, Mr. Bett still testified to some interesting information. First, he said that he never saw Amber hit Johnny, other than the one time that she threw either a water bottle or a plastic cup at him. He also said that he didn't see any physical injuries on Amber, but he did testify that he saw physical injuries on Johnny. First, there was the Australia incident with his finger. Second, there was in March 2015 an incident where Johnny had a swollen eyelid and cheekbone. Mr. Bett provided through his testimony some photos of Johnny's face that showed the swelling he described and a bruise on his left cheek. Then he testified that in March 2015, Johnny had scratch marks on his face after an altercation with Amber. He said that they took photos of the injuries because Mr. Bett pressed for it. Mr. Bett said that he wanted those taken to record the injuries in case Amber ever came out with allegations against Johnny. And he also provided photos of Johnny with those scratch marks. But to be honest, those injuries were not nearly as noticeable in the photos as the previous injuries photos were. Anyway, then he talked about the May 21st, 2016 incident. He noted that this was the day after Johnny's mother passed away, and he said that Mr. Bett was with Johnny and Jerry Judge, Johnny's other trusted bodyguard who had passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. Now, on this night, around 7:15 to 7:45 p.m., Johnny said that he wanted to go to the Eastern Columbia building to talk to Amber and to get some of his things. When they arrived, there were candles lit on the table, a wine bottle open, and music playing in the background through a wall. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Bett says that he and Mr. Judge left through the main entrance to the penthouse, then stood there for about 10 minutes before going down the hall to penthouse 3. Not long after that, he says that they heard Amber screaming from penthouse 5, so they ran down the hallway immediately. And when they rounded the corner, they saw Amber next to her friend Rocky. Mr. Bett also testified that Amber looked surprised to see them. And when she saw them, she said something to the effect of, "That's the last time you do this to me, Johnny." In response, Mr. Bett said that Johnny had some kind of a puzzled look, like, "What are you talking about?" When he was asked about Amber's condition, Mr. Bett said that he saw no swelling on Amber's face and that she was not holding her face at any point. Then Johnny, Mr. Bett, and Mr. Judge exited, and on their way out, Johnny wanted to stop into another penthouse to grab something, where he ran into Rocky's then boyfriend, Josh Drew, and an unknown female. Finally, before wrapping up his direct examination, Mr. Bett said that he never saw Johnny act out of violence and he never saw Johnny damage anything either. So that was the direct examination. As I said, Mr. Bett definitely comes across as biased, which is understandable given the amount of loyalty that he feels to someone like Johnny, but I would expect the jury to take the gray areas of his testimony with a grain of salt. Tomorrow we'll be wrapping up with his testimony through cross-examination and a likely redirect by the Depp legal team, and we'll see how his testimony holds up through both of those experiences. But did you see his testimony? If you did, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, according to Court TV, Johnny will also be testifying tomorrow. I expect his testimony to take several days. And of course, this is one of the most highly anticipated testimonies in this trial. So be sure to watch it right here on this channel, live with legal commentary. And until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, I would love it if you'd hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded and so that you can catch every single day of the live stream of this trial right here on this channel, again, with legal commentary. See you in the next video.